Money cannot buy class, but it certainly buys a front-row seat to audacity. Naomi sat in seat 2A, sipping sparkling water, celebrating the biggest promotion of her life. She had earned her place in that plush leather recliner. Yet, to the glaring flight attendant storming down the aisle, Naomi was a glitch in the system. What started as a passive-aggressive request to move to economy quickly exploded into a boardroom-level showdown. Nobody knew the man in 1A was watching. The fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport buzzed with a low, chaotic energy, but inside the exclusive Atlantic Vista Airlines first-class lounge, the world was muted. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, mingling with the delicate clinking of crystal and the hushed murmurs of the international elite. Naomi Carter sat in a high-backed leather chair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain lash against the tarmac. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground her. At 32, Naomi was the lead AI architect for Horizon Tech, one of the most formidable software companies in Silicon Valley. She was a black woman who had clawed her way to the top of an industry that rarely looked like her, let alone welcomed her. Her journey hadn't been paved with trust funds or Ivy League legacies. It was built on grueling 70-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and a brilliant, relentless mind that could untangle the most complex algorithmic nightmares. Tonight was supposed to be a victory lap. Horizon Tech had just finalized the acquisition of a London-based robotics firm, and Naomi was flying out to lead the integration. The company had spared no expense, booking her a $10,000 round-trip ticket in Atlantic Vista's prestigious Vista Suite first-class cabin. It was her first time flying international first class. The ticket sitting in her sleek leather passport holder was more than just a piece of cardstock. It was a physical manifestation of her worth, a testament to the glass ceilings she had shattered. She smoothed the lapel of her tailored emerald green blazer. She looked immaculate, striking a perfect balance between comfortable travel wear and sharp corporate authority. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the side table, mails from the engineering team, congratulatory texts from her mother in Chicago, and a brief, cryptic message from her CEO, Jonathan Pierce. "See you in London. Don't let them push you around during the merger." JP Jonathan was an anomaly in the tech world. Unlike the flashy billionaires who plastered their faces across magazines, Jonathan preferred the shadows. He was reclusive, notoriously uncompromising, and fiercely protective of his engineers. He usually traveled via private jet, but due to a massive storm system grounding private charters, earlier in the day, Naomi knew he was flying commercial somewhere across the Atlantic, though she didn't know which airline. Flight 804, heavy jet service to London Heathrow, is now ready for priority boarding at Gate 12. The lounge intercom purred with practiced elegance. Naomi took a deep breath, gathered her leather tote, and made her way toward the gate. The terminal outside the lounge was a stark contrast, a zoo of delayed passengers, screaming children, and stressed travelers sprinting toward their gates. Naomi navigated the crowds with a quiet confidence. She joined the sparse Group 1 line, standing behind a couple of men in bespoke charcoal suits who were loudly discussing golf handicaps. As the gate agent scanned her boarding pass, the machine let out a satisfying, melodic chime. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter," the agent smiled warmly. "Enjoy the Vista Suite." Walking down the jet bridge, Naomi felt a thrill she rarely allowed herself. The transition from the dreary, rain-soaked jet bridge into the meticulously lit, champagne-scented first-class cabin was like stepping into another dimension. The cabin was arranged in individual pods, each featuring a lie-flat bed, sliding privacy doors, and mahogany-trimmed consoles. She found her pod, 2A, located on the port side of the aircraft. It was spacious, secluded, and overwhelmingly luxurious. A plush duvet and a Vulgari amenity kit rested perfectly on the footrest. Naomi settled in, stowing her tote bag under the ottoman. She sank into the ergonomic seat, letting out a long sigh that released weeks of pent-up corporate stress. For the next 7 hours, she didn't have to code. She didn't have to manage egos, and she didn't have to prove she belonged in the room. She could just exist, pampered and undisturbed. Or so she thought. As the cabin began to fill, the senior purser, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, severe cheekbones, and signature red lipstick, began her rounds. Her name tag read Stephanie. Stephanie moved through the cabin with the practiced grace of a seasoned gatekeeper. She greeted the men in suits with dazzling, familiar smiles, offering flutes of Laurent Perrier and hanging their coats with delicate care. "Mr. Whitmore, so lovely to see you again. Your usual gin and tonic after takeoff." Stephanie beamed at the older, silver-haired man settling into seat 2C, directly across the aisle from Naomi. "You know me too well, Stephanie," the man chuckled, handing her his cashmere coat. Stephanie turned gracefully, her eyes sweeping over the port side of the cabin. When her gaze landed on Naomi, the dazzling smile faltered. It wasn't a blatant sneer, but rather a subtle, instantaneous chilling of her features. It was a look Naomi was intimately familiar with. It was the look she received when walking into a luxury car dealership, or when swiping her card at a high-end boutique. It was the universal silent inquiry of the privileged. "What are you doing here?" Stephanie bypassed Naomi entirely, walking straight to the passenger in 3A to offer him a pre-departure beverage and a warm towel. Naomi watched the blatant omission, but decided not to let it ruin her evening. She reached for the noise-canceling headphones, determined to drown out the world. But the world, it seemed, wasn't done with her. Stephanie finished her rounds, the silver tray of champagne flutes now empty. She marched back up the aisle, her black heels clicking sharply against the thick carpet. She stopped abruptly beside seat 2A. Naomi, sensing the looming shadow, looked up and removed one of the headphones. "Excuse me," Stephanie said. Her voice was perfectly polite, modulated to a sickly sweet frequency that masked the venom underneath. "Are you quite sure you're in the right cabin?" Naomi blinked, the sheer audacity of the question hanging in the chilled, air-conditioned space between them. For a fraction of a second, she genuinely wondered if she had misread her ticket. She looked down at the large 2A printed on the mahogany console, then back up to the flight attendant. "Yes," Naomi replied evenly, keeping her voice calm and steady. "This is seat 2A. I'm in the right place." Stephanie's red lips tightened into a thin, patronizing line. She tilted her head, her eyes performing a slow, deliberate scan of Naomi. Despite the expensive tailored blazer, the designer bag tucked beneath the seat, and the undeniable aura of professionalism Naomi projected, Stephanie's preconceived notions had clearly already written Naomi's story. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass," Stephanie demanded, holding out a manicured hand. She didn't say please. It was an order delivered with the cadence of a school principal addressing a truant child. Naomi felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, the burning, exhausting realization that no matter how high she climbed, she would always have to show her receipts. She calmly unzipped the front pocket of her tote, retrieved the thick cardstock boarding pass, and placed it onto Stephanie's outstretched palm. Stephanie scrutinized the ticket as if she were inspecting a forged banknote. She turned it over, ran her thumb over the printed text, and frowned deeply. "Carter, Naomi," she muttered under her breath, comparing the name on the ticket to the passenger manifest on her airline-issued tablet. "Is there a problem?" Naomi asked, her tone remaining impeccably polite, but adopting a razor-sharp edge. "Actually, yes, there seems to be a discrepancy," Stephanie said, her voice dropping a fraction, adopting a faux sympathetic tone that made Naomi's skin crawl. "It appears there has been a glitch in our boarding system. You were upgraded by mistake." "Upgraded?" Naomi echoed, narrowing her eyes. "I wasn't upgraded. My company purchased a first-class fare. It's a full-fare revenue ticket." Stephanie offered a condescending, tight-lipped smile. "I understand that's what you might think, ma'am, but these third-party booking sites can be very confusing. Often, they show a premium cabin request, but it books into the main cabin. Our system is showing that this suite is actually reserved for one of our Global Diamond members." Naomi knew airline policies intimately. She flew over 100,000 miles a year. She knew that a full-fare ticket, ticketed and confirmed with a seat assignment, could not simply be bumped for a glitch without a massive compensation protocol. But more importantly, she knew she hadn't used a third-party site. HorizonTech's elite corporate travel concierge had booked it directly. "I didn't use a third-party site," Naomi stated firmly. "My company booked this directly with Atlantic Vista. The receipt shows class of service F, first class. I am not an upgrade and I am not moving." Stephanie leaned in closer, invading Naomi's personal space. The sickly sweet facade was beginning to crack, revealing the rigid, authoritarian hostility beneath. "Ma'am, let me explain this to you very simply, so there's no confusion," Stephanie whispered, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "This cabin is reserved for our most exclusive clientele, people who pay a premium to not be disturbed by operational issues. The passenger who rightfully holds this seat is boarding shortly. I am going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and relocate to the main cabin. I have a very nice window seat secured for you in row 45. Row 45, the very back of the plane right next to the lavatories." Naomi stared at the flight attendant. The microaggression had blossomed into full-blown systemic disrespect. Stephanie wasn't just questioning Naomi's ticket. She was questioning Naomi's right to exist in a space of luxury and power. She had looked at Naomi and decided unequivocally that she did not belong in the Vista suite. "I am not moving to row 45, Naomi said, her voice carrying a quiet, unshakable authority that she usually reserved for rogue developers in her engineering department. "If there is a legitimate operational issue, I want to see the gate agent. I want to see the manifest that proves I was not booked in this seat. And if you are involuntarily denying me boarding in my ticketed class, I want the paperwork for the Federal Aviation Administration required compensation." Stephanie blinked, momentarily taken aback by the barrage of industry terminology. She clearly hadn't expected the black woman in 2A to know her legal passenger rights. The flight attendant's cheeks flushed a blotchy pink beneath her foundation. "I am the senior purser on this aircraft," Stephanie snapped, abandoning all pretense of customer service. "My word is the final authority before those doors close. You are occupying a seat that belongs to a high-tier VIP. If you do not move voluntarily, you are creating a disturbance. And Atlantic Vista Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for disruptive passengers." Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, rhythmic thudding. She was hyper-aware of the eyes on her. The businessman in 3A had paused his movie, blatantly eavesdropping. A couple in row 4 were whispering behind their hands. The humiliation was designed to break her, to make her scurry to the back of the plane, just to escape the burning spotlight of public embarrassment. "I am not the one creating a disturbance," Naomi replied, her hands resting calmly on her lap, belying the adrenaline surging through her veins. "You are harassing a paying customer. I have shown you my boarding pass. I have confirmed my identity. I am staying in my seat." Stephanie straightened up, her eyes flashing with indignant fury. "Very well," she said, her voice icy and loud enough to ensure the entire first-class cabin heard her. "I tried to handle this quietly, but if you refuse to follow crew member instructions, I will have no choice but to call security and have you forcibly removed from this flight." The word security dropped into the quiet cabin like a live grenade. The ambient jazz music seemed to fade away, swallowed by the sudden, suffocating tension that gripped the Vista suite. Across the aisle, Charles Whitmore, the silver-haired passenger in 2C, let out a loud, theatrical sigh. He folded his Wall Street Journal with a sharp snap and glared at Naomi. "For God's sake," he grumbled, his voice projecting easily across the aisle. "Just do what the lady asks. Some of us have important meetings in London, and we'd like to take off on time. You can sort out your ticketing mistake on the ground." Naomi turned her head slowly, meeting Charles's gaze. He looked at her with the exact same dismissive arrogance that Stephanie had exhibited. To them, she was an inconvenience, a stubborn obstacle delaying their privileged lives. "My ticket is not a mistake, sir," Naomi addressed him directly, her voice remarkably steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "And my meetings are just as important as yours. I will not be bullied out of a seat I rightfully own." Charles scoffed, rolling his eyes and raising a hand to flag down the flight attendant. "Stephanie, please. Just get the gate agent to pull her off. I can't tolerate this kind of entitlement." The hypocrisy of his statement almost made Naomi laugh. Entitlement. He was sitting in a $10,000 pod, demanding a woman be thrown off a plane because she refused to surrender her legally purchased property, and she was the entitled one. Stephanie, emboldened by the support of a wealthy regular, nodded sharply at Charles. "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Whitmore. I'm handling it immediately." She turned her wrath back to Naomi. "This is your last warning. Gather your bag." Naomi didn't move an inch. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her sleek smartphone, and unlocked it. "Since you are now threatening me with forced removal, I am going to record this interaction for my legal counsel," Naomi stated, tapping the camera app and pointing the lens squarely at Stephanie. "Please state your name and employee number for the camera, and explain why you are attempting to downgrade a passenger holding a confirmed first-class revenue ticket without offering the legally mandated compensation." Stephanie threw her hands up, stepping back as if the phone were a weapon. "You are not permitted to film me. That is a violation of airline policy. Put that away immediately." Actually, FAA regulations do not prohibit photography or videography of public events on an aircraft, provided I am not interfering with your duties, Naomi countered effortlessly, her years of meticulously researching corporate legalities paying off. "And right now your duty seems to be harassing me based on a fabricated glitch. So go ahead, call security, let's get the Port Authority on board. I'm sure they'll love to see the paperwork proving this seat belongs to someone else." Stephanie was practically vibrating with rage. She had expected a quick, intimidated compliance. She had expected Naomi to bow her head in shame and scurry away to economy. She had not prepared for an articulate, legally savvy woman willing to escalate the situation to the authorities. "Chloe," Stephanie barked, turning toward the galley. A junior flight attendant, looking barely 22 and terrified, poked her head out from behind the curtain. "Go to the jet bridge. Tell the captain we have a non-compliant, hostile passenger in 2A. Tell him to call the terminal police." Chloe looked at Naomi, her eyes wide and apologetic, but she didn't dare disobey the senior purser. She nodded quickly and disappeared down the aisle. Naomi kept her phone trained on Stephanie. Her outward composure was a masterclass in stoicism, but inside she was fighting a war. The humiliation was a heavy, suffocating blanket. She thought about her team at Horizon Tech, relying on her to be in London. If she was dragged off this plane, she would miss the merger kickoff. The optics would be a nightmare. But if she surrendered, if she let this woman strip her of her dignity and force her to the back of the plane, a piece of her soul would shatter. She was tired of shrinking to make others comfortable. She planted her feet firmly on the plush carpet. She would go down fighting. Minutes ticked by like hours. The cabin was dead silent, save for the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power. Other passengers stared intently at their screens, desperately trying to ignore the volatile situation playing out in the aisle. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed from the jet bridge, the sound of authority. Stephanie's posture straightened, a triumphant smirk ghosting across her red lips. She turned toward the front of the cabin, ready to welcome the police officers who would vindicate her authority. "Right this way, officers," Stephanie called out, stepping aside to clear the path. "The disruptive passenger is right here in 2A. But it wasn't the police who stepped through the cabin door. It was a man in his late 40s, wearing a slightly wrinkled navy blue zip-up sweater over a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn-in leather loafers. He had messy brown hair speckled with gray, and dark, piercing eyes that immediately swept the cabin, taking in the scene with the hyper-focused processing speed of a supercomputer. He carried a battered canvas messenger bag, slung casually over one shoulder. To the untrained eye, he looked like a weary college professor who had wandered onto the wrong aircraft. Stephanie's triumphant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a mask of polite confusion. She stepped directly into his path, blocking his entry. "Excuse me, sir," she said, using her firmest gatekeeper voice. "Boarding is temporarily halted for a security issue, and I believe you might be looking for the main cabin. This area is restricted to first-class passengers." The man didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply reached into the front pocket of his jeans, pulled out his boarding pass, and handed it to her. Stephanie looked down at the ticket. Her eyes widened, flicking frantically from the paper to the man's face. "Actually," the man said, his voice surprisingly deep and entirely devoid of warmth, "I'm in seat 1A, and from what I just heard from the jet bridge, you are currently threatening my lead architect." Naomi lowered her phone, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the man standing at the front of the cabin. Jonathan Pierce, the billionaire CEO of Horizon Tech, had finally arrived, and he looked absolutely furious. The silence that fell over the first-class cabin was absolute, the kind of heavy, pressurized quiet that precedes a violent storm. Stephanie, the senior purser, stood frozen in the aisle. Her hand was still outstretched, having just taken the boarding pass from the unkempt, casually dressed man blocking her path. She looked down at the heavy stock paper. Pierce, Jonathan, Seat 1A Vista Suite, Global Diamond Elite. The blood drained from Stephanie's face, leaving her severe cheekbones looking hollow beneath her carefully applied makeup. She knew the name. Everyone in the airline's corporate and premium service divisions knew the name. Horizon Tech was one of Atlantic Vista Airlines' largest corporate accounts, funneling tens of millions of dollars annually into their international routes. And the man standing before her, looking like he had just rolled out of a weekend coding binge, was the undisputed architect of that empire. Mr. Pierce, Stephanie stammered, the authoritative venom in her voice instantly evaporating, replaced by a hollow, desperate tremor. I apologize. We weren't expecting you to board so late. Please, let me show you to your suite. Jonathan did not move. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on Stephanie with a chilling, predatory focus. He had built his multi-billion-dollar company by identifying systemic flaws and eradicating them with ruthless efficiency. Right now he was looking at Stephanie like she was a critical error in his code. I don't need to be shown to my suite, Jonathan said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a quiet, terrifying calm. What I need is for you to explain why you are threatening to call terminal police on my lead AI architect, who is sitting in her legally ticketed seat. Naomi watched from 2A, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had worked with Jonathan for 4 years. She knew his brilliance, his reclusive nature, and his intense loyalty to his core team, but she had never seen him step into the public arena like this. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. Power radiated from him in invisible waves, instantly neutralizing Stephanie's artificial authority. Sir, there has been a misunderstanding. Stephanie floundered, desperately trying to salvage her crumbling narrative. She plastered on a tight, panicked smile, glancing nervously around the cabin. Miss Carter's ticket was flagged in our system. It's an operational glitch. I was simply trying to relocate her so the rightful VIP passenger could take the seat. We have protocols. Protocols, Jonathan interrupted smoothly. Fascinating. Let's talk about protocols. Because my executive assistant booked these 2 suites 3 weeks ago. I have the digital receipts, the confirmation hashes, and the routing numbers on my phone. So, unless Atlantic Vista Airlines is in the habit of double booking $10,000 international suites and then forcibly ejecting black women to cover their algorithmic mistakes, I suggest you tell me the truth. The phrasing struck the cabin like a physical blow. Jonathan had said the quiet part out loud. He had named the invisible bias hanging in the air, dragging it under the harsh fluorescent lights for everyone to see. Across the aisle, Charles Whitmore, the silver-haired businessman in 2C, huffed loudly, his face reddening. He was unaccustomed to the atmosphere of a room shifting so drastically without his permission. He leaned forward, attempting to reclaim the narrative. "Now see here, young man," Charles barked, addressing Jonathan with the patronizing tone of a seasoned country club patron. "There's no need to make this into something it isn't. The flight attendant is just doing her job. If the airline made a mistake, your employee needs to move to the back so we can push back from the gate. We are all busy people. I have a board meeting in London at 9 tomorrow morning." Jonathan turned his head slowly, assessing Charles with the same clinical detachment he used to analyze failing startup pitches. He took in the bespoke suit, the expensive watch, and the sheer audacity of the interruption. "And you are?" Jonathan asked, his tone perfectly flat. "Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Global Logistics." The older man puffed up his chest, clearly expecting the name to carry weight. Jonathan held his gaze for a long, suffocating moment. "Whitmore Logistics," Jonathan repeated softly. "You run the legacy supply chain software on the East Coast. Your Q3 earnings were down 12%, and you're currently hemorrhaging clients to automated dispatch systems." Charles's mouth dropped open, his face flushing a deep, mottled purple. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Whitmore, Jonathan continued, stepping slightly closer to the older man's pod. And I know that my employee, Miss Carter, wrote the neural network algorithm that is currently putting your outdated logistics firm out of business. So, respectfully, your board meeting in London is entirely irrelevant to me. Do not interrupt me again. A stifled gasp echoed from row 4. Naomi had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep her jaw from dropping. Jonathan had just surgically dismantled the man who had spent the last 10 minutes treating her like a secondary citizen. Charles sank back into his plush leather seat, utterly humiliated, his bluster completely punctured. Jonathan turned his attention back to the pale, trembling flight attendant. Now, he said, tapping his watch, you have 60 seconds to produce the manifest showing this imaginary VIP, or I am escalating this to the Federal Aviation Administration. Before Stephanie could utter another desperate lie, the heavy thud of boots echoed down the jet bridge. The curtain whipped open, and 2 armed Port Authority police officers stepped into the first-class cabin, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. Behind them walked David, the harried gate agent, who had scanned Naomi's ticket minutes earlier, and Chloe, the terrified junior flight attendant. We got a call about a hostile passenger refusing to disembark, the lead officer said, his eyes scanning the tense cabin before landing on Jonathan, who was standing in the aisle. Is there a problem here? Yes, officer, Jonathan replied smoothly, not missing a beat. There is a massive problem, but it's not the passenger in 2A. The presence of armed police officers in the confined space of an aircraft cabin immediately elevated the stakes from a customer service dispute to a potential legal catastrophe. The air was thick with tension. Naomi remained seated in 2A, her phone still tightly gripped in her hand, though the recording had stopped. She felt a bizarre mix of terror and absolute vindication. Stephanie, seeing the officers, made a final desperate play for control. She lunged forward, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Naomi. Officers, thank God you're here. This woman is refusing crew instructions. She is occupying a seat that belongs to a VIP passenger, and she became verbally hostile when asked to relocate. She needs to be removed immediately so we can close the doors. The lead officer, a burly man with a salt and pepper mustache, whose name tag read Officer Miller, frowned. He looked at Naomi, who sat perfectly still in her emerald blazer, radiating professional calm. She didn't look hostile. She looked like an executive being held hostage by absurdity. Officer Miller then looked at Jonathan, who was standing defensively in front of Naomi's pod. Ma'am, is this true? Officer Miller asked Naomi, his tone cautious but neutral. It is a complete fabrication, officer, Naomi said, her voice clear and carrying effortlessly through the hushed cabin. I am in my ticketed confirmed seat. I have shown her my boarding pass. I have not raised my voice, nor have I been hostile. This flight attendant is attempting to downgrade me based on a lie. It's a system glitch, Stephanie shrieked, her composure finally shattering. David, tell them the system bumped her. All eyes turned to David, the young gate agent standing near the cockpit door. He was clutching an airline-issued tablet to his chest like a shield. He looked at Stephanie, then at Jonathan, and then down at his tablet. He swallowed hard, clearly realizing that whatever he said next was going to end a career. David, Jonathan commanded softly, read the manifest. Read the booking code for seat 2A. David tapped the screen with a shaky finger. Seat 2A. Passenger Carter, Naomi. Booking status confirmed. Class of service J-Class, full fare revenue. Ticket issued directly by Horizon Tech Corporate. A heavy silence fell over the officers. Officer Miller turned a slow, hard glare toward Stephanie. "There's no glitch." "There's no glitch," David confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Carter is exactly where she belongs." "Then who is the VIP?" Jonathan pressed, taking a step toward the senior purser. "Who is this phantom passenger whose comfort was so vital that you were willing to call the police on a black woman minding her own business in her paid seat? Give me a name, Stephanie." Stephanie was backed against the galley counter, looking like a trapped animal. It was a last-minute routing change. A high-tier member. "I don't have the name right now, but hey, Steph. Sorry I'm late." The cheerful, booming voice came from the jet bridge, entirely oblivious to the apocalyptic tension inside the cabin. A woman in her late 20s, wearing designer sweatpants, a cropped hoodie, and carrying an oversized Louis Vuitton duffel bag, strutted onto the aircraft. She breezed right past the bewildered gate agent and the 2 police officers, zeroing in on the senior purser. Security lines were a nightmare. The new arrival laughed, pulling off her sunglasses. "Thanks so much for the hookup, girl. You are a lifesaver." Coach was totally sold out, and I desperately needed to get to London for Sarah's bachelorette. "Which pod is mine?" The first-class cabin erupted into a chorus of stunned gasps and muttered disbelief. Charles Whitmore buried his face in his hands. Naomi felt a cold, sharp anger slice through her. There was no VIP. There was no Global Diamond Elite member. The woman standing in the aisle was wearing an airline lanyard tucked into her bag. She was an off-duty flight attendant. Stephanie, the senior purser, had fabricated an entire systemic glitch, weaponized airline policies, and called armed police officers to forcibly drag Naomi Carter out of her $10,000 suite. Also, she could give the seat to her friend flying standby. Officer Miller's jaw tightened. He turned to Stephanie, his hand dropping away from his duty belt and crossing over his chest. "Let me get this straight," the officer growled, his voice thick with disgust. "You called in a Code 3 hostile passenger, diverting terminal security and delaying an international flight, because you wanted to give your buddy a free ride in first class." "No, that's not." "Brenda, tell them you're a VIP." Stephanie pleaded, her eyes wide with frantic terror. Brenda, the off-duty flight attendant, finally registered the police officers, the furious billionaire, and the utterly silent cabin. She looked at Stephanie, then at Naomi sitting in 2A, and slowly backed toward the exit. I just fly standby," Brenda stammered, realizing she had just walked into a firing squad. "Steph said a seat was broken and she could slide me in." "I didn't know." "A seat isn't broken," Jonathan said, his voice echoing like thunder in a canyon. "A system is broken. A system that allows employees like you to look at a woman like Ms. Carter, decide she doesn't belong based on your own prejudiced assumptions, and abuse your authority to steal from her." Jonathan reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out his phone. "Officer Miller, I believe filing a false police report and misuse of emergency airport services is a federal offense, correct?" "Yes, sir, it is," Officer Miller replied, glaring at Stephanie. "Excellent," Jonathan said, swiping on his screen. "While you handle the legal ramifications of this utter disgrace, I am going to handle the corporate ones." Jonathan hit a speed dial number on his phone and put it on speaker. The electronic ringing echoed through the hushed cabin, a digital countdown to the total destruction of Stephanie's career. Naomi sat up straighter, watching her CEO go to war for her. It was a surreal, vindicating spectacle. For years, she had fought these battles alone. In conference rooms, at tech summits, in hotel lobbies, smiling through the microaggressions, managing the fragile egos of those who underestimated her. Now she was watching the heavy artillery roll in. On the third ring, the line clicked open. A crisp, professional male voice filled the cabin. Richard Davies, VP of Operations. "Go ahead, Richard. It's Jonathan Pierce." The tone on the other end shifted instantly from professional exhaustion to hyper-alert deference. "Jonathan, good evening. Are you on your way to London? Is everything all right with the flight?" "No, Richard, it is not all right," Jonathan said, his voice ice-cold. He kept the phone raised, ensuring every word was broadcast to the stunned audience in the Vista suite. "I am currently standing in the first-class cabin of Flight 804. We are delayed at the gate because your senior purser, a woman named Stephanie, just attempted to illegally downgrade my lead AI architect." "What downgrade?" "There must be a mistake, Jonathan. Your team is coded." "There is no mistake, Richard." Jonathan cut him off brutally. "Your employee bypassed the ticketing system, fabricated an operational glitch, and called armed terminal police to claim my lead engineer was a hostile passenger. And why? Because she wanted to illegally gift a $10,000 revenue seat to her off-duty friend flying standby." A sharp intake of breath hissed through the speakerphone. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say. That is a massive violation of—" "I'm not finished," Jonathan barked, the absolute authority of a man who controlled billions of dollars silencing the airline executive. "Your purser looked at a brilliant black woman holding a confirmed ticket and instantly decided she was an anomaly that needed to be removed. She weaponized your airline's zero-tolerance policy to bully her. She humiliated her in front of a cabin full of people. This isn't just a policy violation, Richard. This is blatant, malignant bias, and I will not allow my people to be subjected to it. Jonathan, please, let me handle this. I am calling the station manager at JFK right now." "You're going to do more than that," Jonathan said, his eyes locking onto Stephanie, who was now openly weeping, her carefully constructed facade completely obliterated. Horizon Tech spends roughly $45 million a year on global corporate travel with Atlantic Vista. We are your second-largest corporate account on the eastern seaboard. If this flight pushes back from this gate with this purser on board, I will void that contract by tomorrow morning. I will move every single executive, engineer, and consultant to your direct competitor, and I will make a public statement to the Wall Street Journal detailing exactly why." The threat hung in the air, heavy and lethal. $45 million. To an airline still recovering from quarterly's losses, it was a catastrophic blow. "That will not be necessary, Jonathan," Richard Davies said, his voice completely devoid of corporate fluff. He was in full damage control mode. "I am dispatching the chief pilot and the JFK terminal director to the aircraft immediately. The purser is suspended pending termination, effective this exact second. She is to be removed from the aircraft." "Understood," Jonathan said. He didn't say goodbye. He simply tapped the screen, ending the call. He lowered the phone and looked at the two police officers. "Gentlemen, the airline executive has confirmed this employee is suspended. She has filed a false report and attempted theft of services. Do what you need to do." Officer Miller nodded. He stepped forward, pulling a pair of zip-tie cuffs from his belt, though he didn't deploy them just yet. He pointed toward the jet bridge. "Ma'am, gather your belongings. You are coming with us to the terminal precinct for questioning." "Please," Stephanie sobbed, looking frantically around the cabin for an ally. She looked at Charles Whitmore in 2C, but the logistics CEO had suddenly found a sudden, deep interest in the fabric of his armrest, refusing to make eye contact. She looked at her friend Brenda, but the off-duty flight attendant had already bolted back down the jet bridge, desperately trying to save her own skin. Finally, Stephanie looked at Naomi. The senior purser's eyes were rimmed with ruined mascara, her arrogance entirely stripped away. But Naomi offered no quarter. She did not smile, she did not gloat, and she did not offer forgiveness. She simply stared back with the calm, unshakable dignity of a woman who knew her worth long before she stepped onto the plane. Stephanie, shoulders slumped in total defeat, turned and walked off the aircraft, escorted by the two armed officers. The heavy silence in the cabin was finally broken by a collective, exhaled breath from the remaining passengers. David, the gate agent, stood trembling near the cockpit door. Jonathan turned to him, his demeanor instantly softening from a warlord back to a calm, pragmatic CEO. "David, is it?" Jonathan asked gently. "Yes, sir," the young man stuttered. "You were put in an impossible position by a superior," Jonathan said, offering the young man a nod of professional respect. "But you read the system truthfully when it counted. Thank you. Now, can we get a replacement purser and get this plane in the air? We have a robotics firm to acquire in London." "Right away, Mr. Pierce. The reserve crew is already on their way." David practically bowed before scurrying back up the jet bridge to facilitate the change. Jonathan stood in the aisle for a moment, running a hand through his messy, graying hair. The intense, terrifying aura he had projected moments ago vanished, replaced by the weary, casual demeanor of the man Naomi knew from the office. He turned and stepped up to Naomi's pod. "Are you all right, Carter?" he asked quietly, the genuine concern evident in his dark eyes. Naomi let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving her muscles feeling light and exhausted. She looked up at her boss, a profound sense of gratitude welling in her chest. "I'm fine, Jonathan," Naomi said, a small, genuine smile breaking through her stoic expression, "though I think my heart rate is currently competing with the jet engines." Jonathan offered a rare, crooked grin. "You handled yourself perfectly. You didn't give an inch. But next time someone tries to tell you that you don't belong in the room or the cabin, don't wait to invoke my name. You earned this seat. You own it," Naomi promised softly. "Good," Jonathan said, tapping the mahogany console of her pod. "Now, get some sleep. I expect you sharp for the merger meeting tomorrow." "And Carter," Naomi looked up. "Yes? Remind me to rewrite the automated corporate booking system when we get back," Jonathan smirked, heading toward his seat in 1A. Clearly, it's too complex for some people to understand. As Jonathan disappeared into the privacy of his suite, Naomi sank back into the plush leather of seat 2A. The ambient jazz music slowly returned over the cabin speakers. Across the aisle, Charles Whitmore kept his reading light off and his privacy door firmly shut. Naomi reached for her glass of sparkling water. The ice had melted, but the water was still cold and refreshing. She took a sip, looking out the large oval window at the rain-slicked tarmac of JFK. The storm outside was breaking, clearing the way for their departure. She wasn't just a passenger on a plane. She was the lead AI architect of Horizon Tech. She was a woman who had stood her ground against prejudice, backed by the unyielding support of a leader who valued her mind above all else. She reclined her seat, pulling the plush duvet over her lap, ready to cross the ocean. She was exactly where she belonged. The remainder of Flight 804 was an exercise in unparalleled, almost reverent hospitality. When the replacement crew boarded at JFK, word of the catastrophic suspension had clearly preceded them. The new senior purser, a distinguished, silver-haired gentleman named Thomas, approached Naomi's pod before the cabin doors even closed. He carried a silver tray holding a fresh crystal glass of sparkling water and a small handwritten card. Ms. Carter, on behalf of the entirely new cabin crew, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the unacceptable delay, Thomas said, his voice a soothing, professional baritone that immediately lowered Naomi's residual anxiety. We are honored to have you flying with us in the Vista Suite. If there is anything, absolutely anything, you require during our crossing, you have only to press the call button. Naomi took the water with a gracious smile, unfolding the card. It was a personal apology from the captain, echoing Thomas's sentiments and assuring her of her valued status. For the next 7 hours, Naomi was treated not as a corporate problem, but as the esteemed guest she had paid to be. She slept soundly, the gentle hum of the jet engines serving as a white noise backdrop to the profound sense of peace that had settled over her. She had fought the battle, she had held her ground, and she had won. When the heavy wheels of the aircraft finally kissed the tarmac at London Heathrow, the morning sun was just beginning to break through the perennial English drizzle, casting a golden, optimistic light over the sprawling airport. Naomi and Jonathan bypassed the long customs lines, utilizing the fast-track lanes reserved for premium passengers. As they waited for their black car service in the arrivals hall, Jonathan finally addressed the elephant in the room. He handed Naomi a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea he had just procured from a nearby cafe. "You slept well?" Jonathan asked, his eyes scanning his phone for morning market updates. "Like a rock," Naomi replied, letting the warmth of the tea seep into her hands. "Thank you, by the way, for last night. You didn't have to step in like that." Jonathan looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, uncompromising sincerity. "Naomi, I didn't step in to rescue you. You were already dismantling her with terrifying precision. I stepped in because it is my job to protect the environment my people operate in. You are the vanguard of Horizon Tech. When they disrespect you, they disrespect the entire architecture of what we've built. Never thank me for doing the bare minimum of leadership." Naomi nodded, swallowing hard against the sudden knot of emotion in her throat. "Understood." "Good," Jonathan said, his tone shifting back to business as their sleek Mercedes pulled up to the curb. "Because Harrison Croft is going to be a nightmare today, and I need you ready to tear his legacy code to shreds." Harrison Croft was the CEO of Vanguard Robotics, the London-based firm Horizon Tech was acquiring. He was a notorious traditionalist, a man who believed in ironclad mechanics over agile software, and he had been openly hostile about the acquisition from day one. He was exactly the kind of man Charles Whitmore was: wealthy, entitled, and entirely unaccustomed to being told his methods were obsolete. When Naomi walked into the sprawling, glass-walled Vanguard boardroom overlooking the River Thames 2 hours later, she felt a profound electric shift in her own posture. The incident on the plane had unlocked something dormant within her. She was no longer just the brilliant engineer who preferred to let her code do the talking. She was the lead architect who commanded the room. She wore a sharp navy blue pantsuit, her laptop tucked under her arm like a weapon, and she carried the quiet, lethal confidence of a woman who had faced down systemic intimidation and walked away unscathed. Harrison Croft sat at the head of the massive oak table surrounded by a phalanx of older, predominantly male executives. When Naomi and Jonathan entered, Croft stood, offering a stiff, obligatory handshake to Jonathan, before turning a dismissive, patronizing glance toward Naomi. "Ah, the famous Horizon engineering team," Croft said smoothly, his British accent dripping with condescension. "I must say, Jonathan, when you said you were bringing your lead architect to integrate our systems, I expected someone with a bit more tenure in the hardware sector. It was a thinly veiled insult, an exact echo of the flight attendant's unspoken query, "What are you doing here?" Before Jonathan could utter a single word, Naomi stepped forward. She didn't shrink. She didn't seek Jonathan's permission. She bypassed Croft's outstretched hand entirely, walking directly to the head of the table and plugging her laptop into the primary projection system. Tenure in hardware is exactly why Vanguard's Q4 automation failed by 22%, Mr. Croft, Naomi stated, her voice ringing out clear and authoritative in the cavernous boardroom. She tapped a key, and a massive, complex schematic of Vanguard's failing proprietary network illuminated the screen behind her. "You're trying to solve software latency with heavier titanium joints. It's the equivalent of putting a stronger saddle on a dying horse." The entire Vanguard executive team stiffened, a collective gasp echoing in the room. Croft's face flushed a deep, indignant red. "Excuse me," Croft sputtered, slamming his palms on the table. "You have been in this building for 3 minutes, young woman, and you think you can. I think I can streamline your entire neural mapping system by excising the bloated middleware you've been paying millions to maintain." Naomi interrupted, her tone devoid of malice but packed with undeniable absolute authority. "I spent the last 2 weeks reviewing your architecture. It's antiquated, it's vulnerable to brute force intrusion, and it bottlenecks under heavy load. If you want this merger to survive the regulatory board, you are going to transition to Horizon's quantum state algorithms, and you are going to do it my way." She turned from the screen, resting her hands firmly on the polished oak table, leaning in to look Croft dead in the eye. It was the same unyielding gaze she had given the senior purser. "My name is Naomi Carter. I am the lead AI architect for Horizon Tech, and I am the reason your hardware is about to become relevant again. Now, if you're finished questioning my tenure, I suggest we open to page 4 of the briefing packets and get to work." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Croft stared at Naomi, his jaw tight, his pride wounded, but his business acumen sharp enough to recognize when he had been utterly outclassed. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his chair and opened the briefing packet. Jonathan Pierce sat leaning against the back wall of the boardroom, his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't said a word since they entered. He didn't need to. He simply watched his lead architect run the table, a proud, distinct smirk playing on his lips. The integration meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end of it, Naomi had completely restructured Vanguard's developmental timeline, won over their skeptical engineering heads with sheer technical brilliance, and established an ironclad boundary of respect with Harrison Croft. She didn't just survive the boardroom, she conquered it. 3 days later, as Naomi and Jonathan waited in the exclusive Atlantic Vista Lounge at Heathrow for their return flight to New York, the fallout from the JFK incident was officially finalized. Jonathan slid his tablet across the small coffee table toward Naomi. On the screen was a formal, heavily vetted press release from Atlantic Vista Airlines, alongside a private, digitally signed letter from Richard Davies, the VP of Operations. Naomi skimmed the text. Stephanie, the senior purser, had been formally terminated for gross misconduct and fabricating a security threat. Brenda, the off-duty flight attendant, had been stripped of her flight privileges and placed on unpaid administrative leave. Furthermore, Atlantic Vista Airlines had agreed to a comprehensive third-party audit of their premium cabin service protocols to root out implicit bias, funded entirely by their own corporate treasury. But the final paragraph of the private letter was what caught Naomi's eye. Atlantic Vista had offered Naomi a lifetime global diamond elite status and a massive financial settlement to avoid a discrimination lawsuit. "I told Davies you'd make your own decision on the settlement," Jonathan said, sipping his black coffee. "Though I strongly suggest you take their money. They need to feel the pain in their ledger." Naomi looked at the astronomical figure on the screen. It was more money than she had made in her first 5 years out of college. She smiled slowly, a deep, satisfying warmth spreading through her chest. "I'll take it," Naomi said softly, "but I'm not keeping it. Have legal set up a trust. I want to donate the entire settlement to the STEM Foundation in Chicago that funds coding camps for underprivileged girls of color. Let Atlantic Vista Airlines pay to train the next generation of women they'll eventually have to serve in first class." Jonathan's smirk widened into a genuine, brilliant smile. "Consider it done, Carter. Flight 805 heavy jet service to New York JFK is now ready for priority boarding," the lounge intercom announced. Naomi picked up her leather tote. She didn't feel the nervous anticipation she had felt days ago. She felt grounded, powerful, and entirely in control of her own destiny. As they walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the aircraft, the crew greeted her by name, their smiles genuine and respectful. She walked past the galley, turned into the portside aisle, and stopped at seat 2A. She placed her bag under the ottoman, sank into the plush leather, and looked out the window. She had paid for the ticket, but she had earned the respect. And she knew with absolute certainty that no matter what room, boardroom, or cabin she walked into for the rest of her life, nobody would ever make her move again. What a truly unbelievable journey. From Naomi facing unimaginable disrespect to Jonathan Pierce, delivering the ultimate billionaire boss smackdown, this story proves that true class isn't about the ticket you hold. It's about how you treat people. If you loved watching justice served cold at 30,000 feet, make sure you hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to always stand their ground. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily dramatic stories. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Naomi's shoes? See you in the next one.